Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon to all our friends around the world. We're here today with a special guest, Isaac. And I just wanted to take a minute real quick to not only introduce our special guest, Isaac, but this is our first time being on the official .NET assets, and we're super excited to have been adopted into this amazing family of on .NET and the community stand-up and things that we've admired for many, many years. So my name is David Pine. I'm one of the co-hosts for the .NET Doc Show. I'm super excited to be here, and I'll throw it up to point to Cam.
I'm Cam Soper. I work with Dave and Scott here in the documentation in .NET. We put together the show as a way to showcase what we find interesting in the .NET community, and also maybe drive a little bit of contribution and excitement about our documentation. Scott, would you like to introduce yourself a little?
You've got to point over to me. Brady Bunch opportunity there. Thank you. So I'm Scott Addy. Probably not the Scott you're looking for. However, I work with David and Cam on the .NET Docs team. Primarily what you'll see me working on is Microsoft Learn modules for ASP.NET Core. We will toss it down to this guy, Isaac, and he caught it.
Well, no, the camera's flipped, so I messed that up. So my name is Isaac Levin. Funny enough, like the three people here are very good friends of mine because I've been a contributor to Docs for a while. But currently, what my job is I'm a senior product marketing manager in Azure marketing at Microsoft. So what my responsibility is storytelling end-to-end scenarios for developer tools for our major event. So, for instance, if you see keynotes and you see cool demos, I'm part of the team that builds the demos. So you're
a little bit of the guy behind the curtain on that, huh?
Yeah. So like, you see the big face, you see the Scott Hanselmans of the world, not to plug Scott, but behind the scenes, he has a litany of people that are making sure he is awesome, but we don't have to work very hard.
Gotcha. Cool. Awesome. Yeah. So what's our show about? Maybe we should tell our new friends here what our show is about. I mean, I know Scott alluded to it a bit, but what is it that we like to do here?
Well, I think I'll double click on that a little bit further. So each show, we start off with a segment we call the Checkup, which we'll launch into here in just a minute, where we talk about a doc that we find interesting or relevant to the topic that we're talking about in the next segment, which is called the Hallway Track, which we call it the Hallway Track because one of the things we've noticed in our new in the new reality of how community works in .NET and technology in general is we've really missed that hallway conversation that you have at software conferences, right? We don't really get that anymore in the reality that we have everybody working from home. So we're trying to, I think, recreate a little bit of that with our show.
And to add a little bit more context there, for Docs, one of the big confusing things is, we've got this focus on Docs. Is that all we are? We're from the .NET Docs team, but it's really a play on words. We're like the doctors of .NET, examining different aspects of it. And we like to talk .NET, anything .NET. So cool. Why don't we jump right into our checkup?
So this week's Checkup Doc is actually a Microsoft Learn module. I'm going to throw the URL up on the screen as soon as I remember where I put that. There we go. This Microsoft Learn document is actually a little bit relevant to what Isaac will be talking about today. This module walks you through working with the Microsoft Graph.Net Sdk. Now, this module it uses ASP.NET MVC in .NET Framework. So if you come to check this module out and you're expecting .NET Core, you're going to be like, oh wait, what's up with Framework here? But Framework is just a context here to explore the Graph.Net Sdk. So Microsoft Graph, when we talk about Microsoft Graph, that's the API that we use to query and interact with the Microsoft 365 / Azure AD cloud data set. Get the information about users in those tenants.
So real quick, to be clear, that has nothing to do with GraphQL, right? I think there's a common misconception with that.
Right. No, not at all. And in fact, I don't know the first thing about GraphQL. Now, this is, I personally think it probably could have been better named, but it's the name that it has is Microsoft Graph. And Isaac, I understand this is pretty relevant actually to the project that you've been doing that a lot of people have seen lately, the Presence Lite, right?
Yeah, it definitely is pretty top of mind. So I guess I can just do like a quick intro to what Presence Lite is. So Presence Lite, in its most like the highest level summary, is it allows you to broadcast your team's presence or your team's status, aka the light color, to a smart bulb, whether that be Philips Hue or LifeX or Yeelight, or if you have a particular configuration at home that has you running everything via some API, like sitting on some device. We support all of those things.
Great. So and all of that is enabled by the Graph.Net SDK. What kind of things are you using that for?
So the Graph API, and especially the Graph SDK that's written in C#, it allows you to basically hit different mechanisms of Microsoft Graph. And if you don't know what Microsoft Graph is, for anybody that doesn't know, it's basically a housing structure for a ton of information related to your Azure Active Directory tenant. So you can get calendar information, you can get information about OneDrive, and in this particular scenario, you can get information about what Microsoft calls presence, which is basically your in the Skype for Business days, it was called status, but now it's called presence.
So my understanding is you have some demos for that you could show us, right? Is that correct?
I sure do have some demos. So if you want to switch over to my screen.
Well, on that note, guys, you want to just launch into the hallway track?
Let's do it. That's my favorite segment anyways.
Welcome to the hallway track. So as was mentioned before, this is our attempt at making a virtual Pac-Man shaped circle. And I guess the person we're inviting into that Pac-Man shaped circle is Mr. Isaac Levin. Take it away, Isaac.
Well, real quick, in addition to that, we're inviting all of our guests today also. They can partake in this virtual circle with us. So ask questions. We're here.
Yeah, remember, this is the hallway track at a conference. And if you are curious and you have a question to ask, pipe up and ask it, and we'll try to get you an answer.
So you want me to go?
Go.
Go time.
So if I could just make a comment, can we rename that the hallway, instead of a circle, a U?
We could do that.
Yeah, because U's are more inclusive, right? Because when you're a circle, it's very, very hard to get into. Anyway, that's just me giving people problems on the stream. So anyway, you're looking at my screen here, and what I'm going to show you is basically a high-level demo of what Presence Lite is. So also, Kim, if you want to turn on the other camera of mine. Yay! So as you see here, you have a very standard light. This is actually a LifeX light. And what I want to do is show you what Presence Lite actually does. So Presence Lite, it's this application on the left-hand side or right-hand side. It is a .NET Core WPF application, so Windows Presentation Framework, that is pulling the Graph API to get the presence, and then it broadcasts that presence using the SDK for that particular light. This particular scenario, like I said, it's LifeX. So what I do here is I just want to go to Light Sync Enabled. And if I go to Set Light Colors, I want to sync my team's presence. So as you can see here, the light turns red real quick. If I go over here and change this from in a meeting to say available, that will change to, and I also have a Philips Hue light behind me if you notice that light's changing too. So as you can see here, like pretty quick, it changes the colors. And then you can switch this to say, for instance, Be Right Back, which is your yellow. And then you can, we can set it to Do Not Disturb, which is like a purplish hue. So I guess at the end of the day, it allows you to share, what your availability is in different scenarios. And I think in the world where everybody's working from home, it's really, really, really valuable to kind of show your family and or the people that you live with. It's like, hey, I'm in do not disturb mode. Please don't make some noise or don't come into my office. My kids don't really listen. They'll come into my office and say, your light's red, knowing that it means I'm busy. And they just look at me. Sometimes they have pants on, sometimes they don't. So
same kids, same.
Yeah. So I guess at the end of the day, it's kind of, I stole the idea from an app I used to use a long time ago called Skyu from Microsoft MVP Tom Morgan, who did a very similar thing for Philips Hue using Skype for Business. And then when everybody kind of transitioned from Skype for Business to Teams, that experience wasn't really there anymore. Until the Graph SDK and the Graph API opened up the presence endpoint, which happened late last year, so November 2019. And now it's actually out of beta. It's in the production API endpoint. And that is actually, that was like in June or July. So you have the ability now to wire up your .NET apps to be able to do that with no problem.
And this is open source, right? So we have a friend here on YouTube asking if we could share it with them. And this is the link that we put here.
Yep.
And
yeah, so there's two versions of Presence Lite, and you'll see both versions of Presence Lite in this talk, I hope, as well as the source code for both is in that GitHub repository. And, one of the things I like to call out is that the community for Presence Lite has been pretty awesome. Like the contribution to add Yeelight as well as the custom APIs was done by a community contributor. Since I don't have those things, I wasn't able to test, and he was very gracious to make some code, write some code, and do a PR. And I reviewed it to make sure that it followed the structure. And he provides some testing, basically screenshots of it working. So I was like, looks good to me. Let's ship it. And I haven't heard any complaints about it, so I think we're going well.
that's awesome. Yeah, I definitely could use this because I'm in the process of finishing my basement, and I'm going to have my office down there. And I could easily imagine having a light on the outside of my office door so that I could try to alert family members to say, hey, I'm busy. I'm imagining my light would be red all the time, though, so I don't know how much value it would have.
I mean, I'm in a very similar boat. It's always red. My wife will actually text me, like, what kind of red are you? So one of the things that people have asked is, like, I would love the ability to customize colors, right? Like, maybe because there's actually two different data points coming out of the Presence SDK or API. So there's the availability and the activity. So the availability is actually what the color is, and the activity is actually what you're doing. Say, for instance, if you're in a Teams meeting and you're sharing your screen, it'll actually say availability, do not disturb, activity, presenting. So a lot of people are asking, oh, can we get some more granularity there where I can actually control the colors based on the activity? And I think it's a great idea, and it's something that I'm currently looking into. How do I put that in without writing a bunch of code that doesn't make sense? So that's the, that, and again, these are just things from the community that people have reached out for me. One thing that I'd like to do as well, if people will just, listen to me for a little bit longer, as I mentioned that there's two versions of Presence Lite, right? So this version of Presence Lite you see here is Windows only. So there's kind of a barrier for some folks, right? So you can only run it in certain versions of Windows 10. I realized that, and I quickly determined there has to be a way to make it be able to run on Mac and Linux and other platforms. And I looked around some opportunities, and I came up with the idea of having using .NET Core Blazor, server-side Blazor, and ASP.NET Core Worker Service to basically act as a conduit to be able to do a very similar experience. And I'd love to share that for you if we have some time.
Go right ahead.
Yeah,
Sounds amazing.
Yeah, so let me just, so one thing as well with Presence Lite that I have added just to kind of make the management of lights a bit easier is I actually have a color picker. So I can actually turn off Team Sync. I just have this set to white. I can have it set to any color. And I just do that, and it'll update the lights and basically reset them. So no, this version of Presence Lite is no longer polling anything. And I can actually go in and I can close it. Let me just exit that. right? So what I want to do is let me just pull up some other stuff. So here you have the worker. Let me just make this not for ants. So as you can see here, this is just the directory that has my application in it. And on the left-hand side, I have a terminal. So one thing that's great about starting in ASP.NET Core or .NET Core 3 is you have this concept of single file executables. So in a situation where I don't want to have the .NET runtime on a machine, for instance, a Raspberry Pi or something else, I can actually do a framework-dependent publish, which publishes all the bits for .NET Core to be able to run on a particular machine. And even one step further, like if you look at the directory after you do a framework-dependent build, you have hundreds of files because you have all the DLLs needed for .NET Core to be able to run on that machine. What single file executable allows you to do is basically merge all of those DLLs into one single executable, and I'll show you what that looks like. So if I go here and I just, if I set this, let me just zoom this in for people. So you can go .NET publish, and then you specify your runtime identifier, which is Win x86, so Windows x86. Specify an output directory, the configuration. Then you set this build parameters, publish single file equals true. You run that, it'll actually create a folder here. You'll see it on the right-hand side, and that folder is going to have not very many files in it. So once that's done, we have here, go publish. As you can see, there's nothing in here. Let me just zoom this in too. So I have some, I have a global JSON file. I have some settings files, a web config in the situation where I want to deploy this to IIS, and then I have an executable, and then some static files. That's it. And I could put this anywhere. I can put it on a Raspberry Pi. I can put it on any machine that doesn't have .NET Core on it, and it'll run. So if I go into this particular folder, let me just clear some stuff out here, and then I go presencelite.exe. What this is actually going to do is it's going to spin up an ASP.NET Core application, and if I go to that particular application, let's just go here, boom, you'll see a very similar UI. That UI is actually PresenceLite running in the context of ASP.NET Core. So if I go over here and I want to just configure my LifeX lights, let me just get some groups, and I'll specify status and hit save. My lights update. So if I go in and I change this to say green available, light should turn green after a few seconds. So at the end of the day, what this allows you to do, see green, this runs completely cross-platform. For instance, at home, I've had it turned off right now because when I did a previous version of this kind of PresenceLite talk, my lights went crazy. And I found out because I had a version of it running on some machine or some device on my network, and I didn't turn it off. So I was trying to do a demo, and it just wasn't working. So actually, when I do this at home, I was running on a Raspberry Pi downstairs in my living room, so I don't need PresenceLite installed on my machine at all. So it's a pretty awesome way to go about deploying PresenceLite if you don't want to have it tethered to a machine.
So can you back up just a second? I want to go back to that publish single file switch that you did on the .NET publish command.
Certainly. Let me just so what I'll do is I'll just open up a new tab. Otherwise, I have to stop PresenceLite.
And I don't know if we called out which version of Core is required to use that. I believe it's
I think I said above. In 3, but I said it pretty quickly. I believe it's in 3.0. Yeah.
So can you show that .NET publish command again? All right. So let's look at that. Let's look at that a little. So we're publishing for Windows x86, and then that publish single file equals true. So that's the magic that builds it all into one exe, right? So that has all the runtime components and everything all bundled into one file.
Yes.
And that works cross-platform.
Yes, it does.
So let's compare that then to like this is the first time I've seen that. So like
you can actually see that. So if I go and look at the file size of this executable, and I'm sorry that it's kind of small. It's 122 megabytes.
Ah.
So that is the entire .NET Core runtime needed for this application in one single file.
Okay. See, so I was more familiar with doing like having the runtime dependent, or what's the other word? The other term, self-contained.
Yeah, it's the two
Yeah.
deployment methodologies, self-contained or framework dependent. And the
Mhm.
difference there is framework dependent is sort of like the .NET framework days where it's actually installed on the machine.
Yep, and we can take a look here too. Let me just show you this because we're talking about it. So I just ran a framework dependent build for Windows. So as you can see here, there's almost 400 files in here. And you see you have a bunch of DLLs, and eventually you have an executable. This will still run, even if you don't have .NET Core on the machine. However, that's a lot of files. And sometimes, like, you don't need all these files. Like, really, like, it just makes it far more confusing to figure out what's going on. So with framework dependent, you basically can merge all of them together. And our good friend Brady Gaster's in the chat probably explaining exactly what it does far better than I could. But it just allows you to do some really, really interesting things.
That's really cool. So you can package this up as a single file, and you can package it up for Windows, Linux, or Mac, right? What's the other dependencies involved for Presence Lite? I mean, is there like obviously there's the Microsoft Graph API endpoint. What other components are there that are cloud based?
Let's just do this. Let's actually take a look at the solution for Presence Lite, and I'll actually show you the NuGet packages that I'm referencing. So if this size is good, I can keep going. Otherwise, I can zoom in a little bit. But as you can see here, I'm not using a ton of packages. So this is for the Presence Lite WPF application. So I'm using, as you can, Q42. That is a package for talking to HuBulbs. I'm using the Yeelight API, the Microsoft Graph API, as well as Microsoft Identity Client, which does all of your MSAL, Microsoft Active Directory, Microsoft Azure Active Directory authentication and token caching. And then I have some other things to kind of make my life a bit easier. But at the end of the day, like, this is a very, very similar experience that I have on the Blazor side, right? The Blazor side, I have some Blazor stuff to make my life easier. But as you can see, Identity Client to manage the Graph API and logging in. And then I have another library, which is a .NET Standard library that does like all the talking to lights. And I can show you the code if anybody's interested.
I'd love to see the code. I'm curious too. Like, what would you consider to be a lot of packages?
A lot of packages. Like, I've seen some projects that have like 30, 40. This is like what, 13 or so. I think so. I think it really depends on what you're trying to accomplish too, right? And if you're dependent on, hey, I don't want to do this, does something already exist in the NuGet world? You just grab it.
I also wanted to ask another question, kind of going back to a bit before when you had mentioned how if you have multiple apps running and they're both authenticated in and able to access your single Presence Lite, is there like any type of contention to where they're fighting to set the status or read it or anything like that?
That's kind of what I brought up, right? So when I did this thing a little bit ago, and it was a situation where I was changing the light status, and the light just started flickering different
Right.
statuses, right? Because I had the Raspberry Pi instance running, and then I had an instance running locally, and and they were basically conflicting with each other. So one of the things that you could probably look to do is kind of, I guess, attach a particular light to a version of Presence Lite. That's a bit more complicated than I think what the goal of Presence Lite is. But at the end of the day, the goal for Presence Lite was to make this similar experience available to anybody, regardless of their being technical or not. So you can get Presence Lite in the Microsoft Store, on Chocolatey, on WinGet. And you don't need to be technical at all to set it up. You just need to basically configure your light to Presence Lite, and then you just need to log in using your Microsoft 365 credentials. Yeah, you don't need to do anything else. So one of the things that I really want for people to take from this is that, if you work in a particular department and you're not technical, you can definitely take advantage of it. Even though I know the audience for this stream is definitely technical folks, it's just one of those things where I think more and more people could take full advantage of, letting their family or friends or whoever is living with them at this time know what they're currently doing from the work situation.
And we got a question here from our good friend Cecil. He's asking about you're using identity model, and so why do you need that when you're using the Microsoft Identity Client package? Is there a reason for having both of those?
So identity model, I believe, is used. I need to just double check. It might just be I failed to remove a package, but identity model. Trying to remember exactly what identity model does for it. It lets you hook up in a very similar way, but I don't know. I have a feeling that I need to remove that package reference. Thanks, Cecil. I completely am blanking right now on what OIDC client does as it pertains to what it did for Presence Light. Yeah, so there's your non-answer, Cecil. Sorry.
You could comment that line out and
try to build. Yeah, I could. I definitely could. Let's do that. So if I just run this, so I'm going to be running the WPF version. So I got to go in here and stop the other one.
I wonder if like explicit package references like that would get shaken out. Like when people were talking in the chat about tree shaking and stuff like that. And I wonder if it's smart enough to say, oh, this isn't actually used anywhere. We'll just not even require that whatsoever.
Well, I'm not going to demo this for anybody, period, because I don't have the new I don't have Preview 8, or I have Preview 8 installed, but I don't have the SDK, I don't think. Yeah, I'm getting some error messages that I'd rather not try to debug at this moment.
Yeah, live debugging is always.
Yeah, but I definitely think that one of the things that we could do is I could just remove this and follow up with folks about, hey, why is this not working? So
we have another question in the chat from Mr. Isaac. The question is it possible to get the presence of other folks, for example, team members?
Yeah, so let me talk about actually what presence means, right, from a Microsoft Graph perspective. So, or just take a step back even. So when Presence Lite itself, it's an Azure Active Directory application, which allows you to interact with particular components of the Graph API. So like I said, the Graph API itself, it's a particular endpoint in Graph. But how you build these sort of applications that hit those sort of things is you build an application registration for it. So when I actually walk you through what I did here. So one of the things to call out first is when you talk about using components of Microsoft Graph, you think of them from a scope perspective. So for instance, if I want to get my profile, that's a particular scope. If I want to get my calendar, that's a particular scope. If I want to get presence, a particular scope. So scopes come in different flavors and they all require consent. Consent meaning, hey, I'm granting this particular access or this particular application access to my information. So there's two types of consent. There's user consent, which is, hey, Cam or Scott or Dave, you can grant consent for Presence Lite to get your information, right? There's also this concept of admin consent where, hey, I need an IT admin on my Microsoft Active Directory tenant to approve this application because it's using something that requires a little bit more privileges. So Presence Lite, it uses the .read of user and the Presence API, which do not require admin consent. To Mr. Smoothy's question, if I wanted to get presence for other people that aren't me, I would be able to do so, but I need to have different scopes. I need to have the presence.read.all scope, which basically grants me the ability to get a scope of any individual in my tenant. And that requires admin consent.
So basically what you're saying is the Graph API supports it, but you haven't set up the delegations yet to delegate permission to your app to do it on your behalf.
Yeah, and to be completely honest, I have it already. It's just not turned on. So just a little of how the sausage gets made. So I work at Microsoft. Presence Lite, the Active Directory application, runs on the Microsoft tenant, and it runs as a multi-tenant application, which means anybody who uses Microsoft 365 can use Presence Lite, and they have to just grant Presence Lite, which is in a different tenant, access to their data, which is easily configurable using that. So when I went through the process of getting Presence Lite basically approved by Microsoft IT, I selected presence.read.all and user.read.all because at the time that was required for Presence Lite to be able to get that information when it was in the very, very early beta time. Since that time, admin consent is no longer required for the reads. So I have these admin consent approved scopes that I don't need, so I actually don't enable them, but I have them if I wanted to add them back at some time. So the long and short of it is, to answer the question, yes, Presence Lite could get that because it already has those scopes. Presence Lite isn't written in a way that allows you to say, hey, let me get Dave's status. It easily could be done, but it would require some coding changes.
Cool.
Yeah, I think so.
So this is just one of many open source projects that you've had, and I know that this has gained a lot of popularity because it was one of the focuses or highlights of some recent keynote stuff. So what else do you have that's open source that people might be interested in that we could check out and share?
Sure. So I have I don't know why that's not auto-completing. Azure websites.net. So I built, so a little bit about me. I am in love with data, right? I love being able to see things that relate it. Like I love being able to see how I'm impacting or how I'm bringing value to a particular solution. And one of the ways that I see, okay, if I manage an open source project, how can I figure out if people are using it, if people are enjoying it, and so forth. And one of the ways that you can do that if you have a GitHub repo is you can use this concept of Github Traffic or GitHub Insights. And what they do is they allow you to see things like clones, forks, views, and stars for your repo over a particular amount of time. The maximum amount of time that GitHub shows that data is 2 weeks. And that wasn't good enough for me, because I want to be able to track my repos, basically popularity over time, a long amount of time. And what I decided to do is I built a tool that does that. So I created GitHub Stat Tracker, it's probably a couple months ago now, which basically allows you to see your data over time for a GitHub repository. And how I do that is I utilize the GitHub API to basically pull your repository, get information out of it, and store it in Azure storage, Azure table storage. And so I have an Azure function that runs every day and basically aggregates that data and puts it into table storage. And then I have a UI which basically allows you to manage it and view. So if I take a look, if I just click Get Started, this is going to it's going to authenticate you into GitHub. So as you can see here, that's my GitHub ID. And then you can see all of the repos that you are a owner or a contributor to. So I have a handful here, and I'm just going to use Presence Lite for example. And if you want to, you can select up to 10. And by the way, this is completely free. The code's on GitHub. You're using my Azure subscription, so you're not paying anything for it. I'm paying for it. So if you want to take full advantage of this, go to this site and sign up and just enjoy the insights. So if I click on view traffic for this repo, I have some data over the course of time. So since 4.1, and I have a lot of date here. So let me just actually change this to some time that's actually clean. I'm using Telerik controls for this, and so they look beautiful. So this is basically the month of August. So these are my clones and unique clones, my GitHub views versus unique views, the stars over the course of time, and then as well as the forks. So it's very telling when I see, oh, why did I have 99 clones one particular day, but I only had 4 unique clones? That leads me to believe that maybe I had some builds running that were cloning a lot. Maybe somebody was just playing around. And I see here things are a bit more leveling out on this area. When I did think, and one thing as well that's very interesting is looking at views. Like obviously, full disclosure, so when Scott Hanselman did his keynote at Build, he used Presence Lite to basically control the colors of the lights in his office. And he blogged about it and was very gracious in kind of promoting me. And I got a huge spike on that particular day. But some days I'll see similar spikes where it's like, okay, why was this 228? Maybe somebody came across my blog or what have you. But again, like this just gives me the ability to drill into basically the visibility of my open source packages and kind of get an understanding. So for instance, my stars were plummeting over the course of time. It's like, oh, there's probably a reason for that. Or if I was consistently at, 0 views for a good amount of time, there's probably a reason for that. And it just gives me an idea of what I can do.
Question for you, Isaac. Is there a way to export this data? Let's say I wanted to slice and dice this in Excel. Is that possible?
Currently, no, but it's something that I have. It's on my to-do list, and I literally have been like, I got to do this because it wouldn't be very, very hard. But it is definitely something that I think a lot of people could take advantage of.
Well, and to that point, Azure Table Storage is pretty flexible. It's not too hard to get data out of Azure Table Storage and massage it and serialize it however you want.
Exactly, right. So, and there's tons of open source packages out there that basically will take an array of objects and convert them into an Excel file. Or you can, write, if you just want to do it like in comma separated, like comma delimited, you can easily do that without any packages, right? That's just loops and string manipulation. So it wouldn't be very challenging. It'd probably take me about an hour, but again, I just got to do it.
So
I got a question real quick.
Yeah, I was actually gonna throw to you, David, for that question.
So I was just gonna say, to reassure our audience, is there anything that you can speak to about the admin access that's required for this? Because I would feel very uneasy granting that level of access. I mean, isn't it just reading stuff? Why does it need full admin to even private repositories and stuff?
So So unfortunately, how GitHub has their scopes configured is you need push access to be able to see GitHub traffic. So unfortunately, that's I guess them are the breaks, as the kids say. Unfortunately, based on the scope requirements of the GitHub API, the only way that you can get this data is if you have push permissions to that repo. So that's one of the scopes that I need.
Do you have any sense as to why that might be, or are you
clearly GitHub's broken?
I mean, clearly, yeah.
I mean, so I'm not 100% sure why. I think it'd be a great question to ask somebody at GitHub.
Yeah, no, totally. But we don't have them. We have you.
Sure. Well, let me just call up Nat Friedman real quick. I'll say, hey, Nat, can you fix this real quick? And he's like, sure, no problem. I totally agree. Like, I think one of the things, and you can actually test this yourself. So if you go to any repo that you're not affiliated with, you can't see the traffic data, right? Which I don't understand why that's private information, I guess. Like, it's just views and clones, right? That's the only thing that's really hidden. Stars and forks aren't, right? Interesting why that choice is made, but there's obviously a good reason for it. But in the situation where that was removed and anybody can see that, yeah, I think that we could definitely modify GitHub Stat Tracker to not need those scopes any longer.
When you say scopes, are you referring to the personal access token that's used behind the scenes?
Yep. Yeah. So whenever somebody uses Presence Light, or not Presence Light, uses GitHub Stat Tracker, I use an access token that's generated by that application. So I built an application, an OAuth application in GitHub to be able to do that. So
very cool.
Yeah, so it's definitely cool. I definitely recommend people take advantage of it. Like I said, it's free for 10 repos. My goal is if I can see like what's the break limit, right? Like if my Azure bill all of a sudden is like $600 a month because I have way too many people using it, I might try to figure something out. But I've kind of made a promise to folks that I'm never going to decrease the amount of repos. Like I'm not going to go down to 8 or 7 unless it's financially impossible for me. But then I'm going to add like a donate or buy me a beer or something.
Well, go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Yeah, but my goal is like I would love if it's so cheap that anybody can use unlimited repos. I know people will probably abuse that, but I don't see why like 10 repos to me is enough, right? Like if you need like more insights for more than 10 repos, I'd love to have a discussion with you as to why you need that. But yeah.
So why I'm sorry. What kind of where do you think that breakpoint might be? What kind of resource utilization does this thing take with
Yeah.
the stats for 10 repos? If I were to come in and sign up 10 of my repos, what's the footprint going to be in your table storage and your so forth?
It's not going to be much, right? So I'm using the consumption plan for Azure Functions, and the site is hosted in I think it's a B0. So it's not a very powerful app service. And then I'm using storage, which is dirt cheap. So the most expensive thing by far is just the app hosting. I could definitely look to, and this can maybe allude to another project that I've done, is maybe hosting it in Static Web Apps, which currently is free hosting. So it's one of those things where I could probably look around that. But right now, I think I'm spending like $2 a month on Presence Light or on GitHub Stat Tracker total.
So there are a ton of free options out there for static web hosting, and you mentioned static web hosting, and I go, oh, how is that going to work? With kind of dynamic content and offloading the cost of compute from the cloud to the edge. How does that work? Do you have an example to show us there?
Well, sure. So I have an example that I built. So let me just open this up, and I'm going to use a short link because the real link is terrifying. So I'm going to go to Isaac. Yeah.
Wait. You have your own short link domain?
I do.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. That's actually on my GitHub as well.
I'm kind of jealous. That's one of those things where you're just like, oh wow, this is nerd street cred.
Well, to be fair, I completely stole all of the code from my good friend Jeremy Lickness, and I modified it a little bit to accommodate some of my things. But I would definitely take a look at some of Jeremy Lickness's stuff as well. So if I go to isaacl.dev/Craigslist search, this takes me. Oh, maybe it doesn't. Why? isaacl.dev/ Is it not Craigslist search? Maybe it's just search Craig.
I think you're missing an S after.
Yeah. You typed Craiglist.
Oh,
as in only one Craig.
Well, there is only one Craig. So this will take me to a ridiculously URL. So this is an Azure Static Web App. So if you're not familiar with Azure Static Web Apps, it allows you to host static files with a API backend in Azure. It's in preview right now, and it's currently free. So this is a search Craigslist. So like maybe some other folks on the call, I love Craigslist, unfortunately, because it's like a money pit. I can just search for stuff wherever I want. And what I can do here is let me just search for something like right now I'm searching for graphics cards because I just got the new flight simulator and my graphics card just can't handle it. And I live in the Seattle area, and I'll search this. So this is slow. And the reason why it's slow is because I'm using consumption plan for Azure Functions. So it takes a bit of time. But once it warms up, it's pretty quick. But basically what this application is, it's a WebAssembly-based Blazor application. And people don't know about WebAssembly-based Blazor is that it compiles down to JavaScript, which means that you can take a C# written application, build it, and then the build directory just has JavaScript in it and static files.
And I think that's an important distinction we should make, that if you were to try to do something like this with Blazor Server, the hosting story is very different.
It would not work, right? Because how Blazor Server works is all the rendering is done on the server side, and it sends the DOM updates down using SignalR.
So,
right?
So hypothetically, then, could you pick this up and throw it on some place that does like free static hosting, like GitHub sites or something?
Yeah, you definitely could. The only thing that you would be responsible for is you need an API. So because Blazor WebAssembly Blazor has no server, you can't hit AP. You have to hit APIs, right? So what ends up happening here? Is that you need an API of some sort. So I have an Azure function, which basically does all of the work, right? It does the Craigslist parsing, it does everything, and the WebAssembly application hits that API. So that's why there's a little bit of a delay, right? because I'm using a consumption-based Azure function, and it does take a bit of time to light that up. But if you found some really, really cheap hosting for a server, say like Azure Functions or AWS Lambda, you can, like you said, deploy Craigslist search, for instance, to GitHub pages and just point at that particular URL, and it would work just fine.
So that's an entirely new piece of calculus in the server side versus client side debate that I honestly hadn't thought of. So like all of your client side code that you're doing here in Blazor, I mean, just to reiterate for folks who may not be familiar with Blazor, you're doing .NET coding that is getting that is being run in the client.
Yeah, let me just do this. Let me just pull up the solution, right? Because I'm all about, oh no, I hit the wrong button. I just broke everything.
Did you delete it?
Technically,
no. I accidentally added myself as the owner of the folder in Microsoft in Windows Security, so it probably is broken now.
I was going to say that technically you could host this on GitHub Pages then if it's working on static web apps.
Yeah,
but again, assuming Blazor WASM, not Blazor Server.
Yep. So this is the application. Let me zoom in here. So as you can see here, if anybody's built a Blazor application, you notice that when you build a Blazor WebAssembly hosted, you have 3 projects that get built out. You have you have the client, which is your WebAssembly. You have your server, which is the server that does your actual coding of like hitting different databases or whatever. And then you have a shared project, which is basically your models and things like that. So what I did is I ripped out the server piece and replaced it with an Azure function. So if I go to my client here, this is all just GitHub, or not GitHub. This is all just Blazor WebAssembly. So if I open here, it's .NET Standard. I'm using, let me minimize this. Using components WebAssembly and Blazor Telrik controls. And then the Azure function actually does all of the work. The Azure function is just a service that uses another service that basically parses GitHub. The reason why not GitHub. Why do I keep saying GitHub? It parses Craigslist, right? So what it actually does is it scrapes every location that you look for, it scrapes that Craigslist page. So if you want to search all of Craigslist, which is about 400 and something page locations, it takes a bit of time. So even that's why I say it might take a bit. But let me just show you this. So if we go to Craigslist search this, and let me make this not small, Craigslist search, and I'll go to the client, and I have a published directory. This is what gets built when you build a WebAssembly Blazor application. You have a www root folder, which just has some JavaScript files in it. So those are third-party packages. So there's a CSS file there. There's some JS and CSS framework, and that's your code that basically runs WebAssembly. So that's all that's built. So if you need a static web application, Blazor is a great option if you're already a C# developer.
Question there for you, Isaac. I noticed in your published folder you had a web.config, and I assume IIS isn't used at all in this scenario, so that file is probably unnecessary.
That's correct. Yeah, I believe that is a .NET thing, a .NET run thing, or .NET publish. It might generate a. Actually,
yeah, that's correct. So at publish time, the web config gets generated.
Yep.
That was actually an intentional decision because early on, the app settings.json file became a dumping grounds for folks that were coming over from the legacy ASP.NET world, and they assumed that the app settings from their web.config could go into the app settings.json file.
Yeah, exactly, right? So I think, and to be completely transparent, like 99.9% of .NET, ASP.NET applications probably end up going to an IIS-based application anyway. Like that number obviously isn't accurate. Like people deploy to Linux too, but most .NET developers, they probably prefer Windows as their web hosting, so it would make sense. And one of our friends, Lemon13, said, is this code public? So all of the code that I'm showing and all the code that I really do these days it's actually on GitHub. So you can go to my GitHub repo. I have some pinned repos. So GitHub Stat Tracker, that's the GitHub Stat Tracker website that you saw. Craigslist search is in there, as you can see, server-side Blazor, but that README needs to get updated. I also wrote a cloud client for LifeX light bulbs because there didn't exist one. And then there's some other fun things that I've done. If you play fantasy sports, I wrote a wrapper for the Yahoo Fantasy Sports API like 4 years ago. Still gets used a good amount. Yeah, I love open source. So, yay.
Let me play devil's advocate real quick. So what?
Cool.
I mean, I feel like the mentality is everyone loves open source. I'm one of those individuals. What's one thing that you can say that you don't like about open source?
So there is definitely a lot of echo chambers in open source. Like, so me personally, like I live in the .NET space, and .NET gets a really bad rap in the open source world for whatever reason. And the reason why I think that is because there's lots of misconceptions that happen in different areas, right? And me personally, like I live in the .NET echo chamber, so I only hear really good things about .NET. But when I go over to other places like the JavaScript communities or Python or just Linux people in general, there's a, hey, .NET sucks. And the reason why I think that, to be honest, is because we build these little groups and communities of folks that kind of all speak the same language as me, similar to politics and religion and basically everything else in the world, right? Like you only want to hear things that you agree with. And what ends up happening is you have these little factions of, right, pro-Microsoft versus anti-Microsoft. .NET is dumb. .NET is the best thing that's ever been created. And one of the things that I think that could, as people get more and more familiar with different stuff using open source, I hope that those barriers start to drop. I honestly am a bit of a pessimist by nature, so I don't think it's ever going to happen, but I would love to see it. So I guess that's one of the things I'm not a huge fan of, right, is that you definitely have these factions of people that, like, for instance, even in .NET, like some people will say, like AWS is garbage because Microsoft and Azure and all that stuff, right? I personally like AWS. There's some things that I don't like about AWS, and there's also some things I don't like about Azure. But that I think one of the things that we want to do is we want to find the tools that work for us, and having a preconceived notion of a particular tool not working just because is really a detriment.
So to your point, Isaac, I think you raise a very good point that I hadn't thought of. The term tribalism springs to mind, right? Yeah. It's like everybody's gotta be in their own. Like there's a .NET tribe over here, and there's a JavaScript tribe, which okay, the JavaScript tribe is really big, but they're a tribe.
Yeah. Just for instance, right? Look, so I did like everybody else did, and I built one of those silly, like, this isn't about me for my GitHub repos. It needs to be cleaned up because it looks terrible. But like you looked at my most used languages, C# 55% of the time. Hey, I wonder why that is. It's because I love C#. I'm guessing that the number of things that I've written in Java or Python is 0. I'm currently writing Python code right now for something, but again, like my preference is C#, and my preference will probably always be C#.
Well, so your preference for C#, I think, is probably related to the fact that you're probably better at C# than anything else because that's what you've spent most of your time in. So it kind of becomes a self perpetuating thing. Is you're gonna the more C# you write, the better C# you write, the more C# you want to write, the more you choose C# as the tool stack to as part of the stack to solve whatever problem you're trying to solve.
Yeah, no, it's totally true, right? Like I've been a .NET developer my entire career as a developer. I know that's not true. I started out in ASP Classic, which I guess is not .NET, and then I went to .NET, and then I went to .NET Core, right? I never even really hung out in VB, really. I was very like, I went from ASP to C#, and then I've been in C# for forever. And over that time, you have to basically learn other things too. You got to learn JavaScript and CSS and HTML, and then other miscellaneous things like JavaScript frameworks like Angular or React or whatever. But like I've always been like, hey, I really need to come back to C#. To the extent where if I try to write anything, like I tried to learn Go, I think last year, and it was very painful for me personally because I'm like, I could write this so much faster in C#. Yeah, go ahead.
So I have a question for you, Isaac. I know you and I go back probably a decade now. We were both building web forms app for an insurance company. So we both, seen .NET Framework, used legacy ASP.NET.
Yeah.
My question to you, which is where this is going, is what's one of the things that you enjoy the most about .NET and being open source now with .NET Core?
So it's a little bit of two things, right? So I love/hate the fact that .NET is open source. I'll tell you why. I love the fact that .NET is open source because you can go to their GitHub repositories and see everything that's happening in real time. You can try out preview bits. You can talk directly to the team members, and you have just more availability to the things that you're going to be using in the future, right? I love that. Flip to the other side, the reason why I hate the fact that .NET is open source is because nothing is surprising anymore. I remember, you would not know about anything in the Microsoft world until you saw Builder Ignite stuff, right? And I loved the Christmas feeling, be getting very excited. That doesn't happen anymore. Occasionally, something like Blazor will show up and people are like, "Oh, swear word, that is awesome," but that doesn't happen as much as it used to, right? You can go in and you can see what's being built in C#9 and seeing the spec development for future versions of C#. You can look in and see the conversations that the .NET product teams are having in particular areas. You can try out something like .NET MAUI. You can go and download and try it, and that's not going to be available for over a year, right? That's super exciting that you can play around with those bits, but you also lose that nostalgia of Christmas coming downstairs or whatever holiday you have where you get gifts and just being surprised, right? That's something that I miss, the fact that .NET is open source. But I'll definitely trade that in for the fact that I just get to be part of the experience, which, in the past I was never.
I guess that does ring true with me. I never really thought about that Christmas morning feeling of, hey, I've waited 2 to 3 years for the next Visual Studio and .NET release. It drops, and oh my God, I am so excited. It's a fantastic point that you make there.
If I can make a slight counterpoint to that, I get that feeling all the time still in the new open source .NET world, but it's when I discover something I didn't know was there.
Yeah.
Right? Everybody knows, I like the IoT stuff. Everyone's seen my smoker and stuff. When I discovered that I could run .NET code on ARM devices, that was wait, what? This is a whole new world. I'm I've got these little credit card computers now that I can put all over the house running my code, which that to me, I think is even better than that feeling you're talking about.
No, I totally agree. Or even we live in this age now where every idea you've ever had has already been thought of and developed. So the amount of times that I've been oh, this is a really cool idea, and I'll do some Google searches and oh, there's a GitHub repo that has 4,000 stars to do exactly what I want to do. So you get excited that you find stuff like that instead of having to build it yourself. That rings true to me too. The availability of everything that everybody's ever done has been awesome. And just the fact, just as a complete side, Cam, I wanted to show you this cool new toy that I got, right? It's a PyTop. It runs .NET Core on it. It's super, super awesome. Anyway.
Yeah, I've been meaning to get with you about that because I saw you got one and that you've been tweeting about it or whatnot, and I am a little jealous. I just haven't gotten there yet. I want one and been.
So Isaac, for folks who haven't heard of the PyTop, what's the elevator pitch for this device?
So the PyTop basically, so if you like IoT, right, and everybody who likes IoT probably got started by downloading or buying a Raspberry Pi for $30 and learning how to do some soldering or plugging into a breadboard, and you build out a cool little application that runs on it. Right? What a PyTop does is it actually obfuscates a lot of the complexities needed to the extent where I literally, let me just get some more toys out. So when you buy a PyTop, it comes with all of these sensors, right? So I have LEDs and I have buzzers and ultrasonic sensors, and there's a breadboard that hooks onto the bottom of it that allows you to basically just plug in instead of using GPIO. So it allows you to plug in and easily move back and forth. And then it comes with a bunch of examples for you to actually build out. So like, for instance, one of the things is like, oh, like you can put this on the back of your car and configure basically a backup situation where you can back up. It'll sense how far you are from another car, and then a buzzer will go off, right? Or there's others. They have like 30 or 40 like walkthroughs on how to like write in Python all the things that you're doing. And that's what I mentioned. I was doing Python stuff. That's kind of why, is because I got this and I'm like, I could do a lot of it in C#, but I want to try Python. I did Python a long time ago, but to be honest, I'm basically learning from scratch again. But yeah, like it just gives me an opportunity to play around with a new programming language. I don't know if that was an elevator pitch or not. I talked for like 5 minutes.
No, it really is. So it sounds like for me, this would be useful in that, there's no longer the fear of me backing out of my garage and running over my kid's bike for the 5th time that week. I could develop something that would, mitigate that situation.
Yeah.
So Isaac, we're running short on time here for today's episode. Are there any closing thoughts you wanted to leave the viewers with?
Yeah, I think so. One of the things, and I'm just going to plug something that my friend did, because I did this last time I did this too. I'm going to post it in, where is that? I'm going to post that into the StreamYard private channel. So if you can send that over there. So a friend of mine built something called URL List, which is kind of like a link aggregator. I love using it for a lot of different stuff. And what the URL list basically does, and I'll just paste it on this over here. Basically, it allows you to see like a lot of links. So if anybody's interested about Presence Light, take a look at the urlist.com/PresenceLight, and you'll see where to get it from the store. You'll see a blog post that I wrote about it, as well as where you can get it from Chocolatey, the store, and So that's the Presence Light from a good friend of mine, the URList, Burke and Cecil. And also, like, just as a complete side, like, thank you for having me. The three of us were friends. It's been great. And I'm really proud and honored the fact that, I was your first guest. I know it wasn't by design on the new platform, but it just shows how much work you guys have done. And like, kudos to you. Like, this is absolutely awesome. The fact that you're kind of like an officially supported channel, and you deserve every bit of credit that you got.
Thank you.
Well, it doesn't happen without guests like you volunteering their time to come on and talk to us. So to that, I say thank you very much.
Yep. Thank you. Until next time. And next week, you already posted, we're going to have a good friend of ours, Matt, and he's going to share some stuff for ASP.NET Core and Vue.js. So see you next week, Monday.
Next time. See you Monday, everybody. Thank you.